What's up guys, you're watching Life by TCG. I've got a Magic the Gathering Legacy deck profile for you today. This is Blue-White Sagas. So this is a brew I came up with like just over a year ago, I think it's been. Recently I've updated it, tried some new cards, taken it for a spin, and I just thought I'd let you guys know where it's at. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this deck, I'll just sort of explain how it works. Uses some cards that are not very typical for Legacy. So the main win condition is this Saga, History of Benalia. If you're watching this video, I assume you know how a Saga works, but if not, quickly go look that up, I suppose. The first two chapters, you make 2/2 Knight with Vigilance. The third chapter is all of your knights get +2/+1. So this card has only really seen play in Standard. It's not really a card you see in Modern or even like Pioneer or Historic, I don't think. And it was mainly used as just like an aggro card in like a white weenie kind of strategy. The way you need to think about it in Legacy, in this list, is it's like a kind of Monastery Mentor. 3 mana white card, makes some tokens, gets aggro quite quickly, and can take over the game. So in a way it looks a lot worse than Mentor, right? Because with Mentor you get a token for every cantrip you play. You can gain unlimited number of monk tokens off just one Mentor by playing all of your Brainstorms and Ponders and so on. Whereas History of Benalia, you only get 2 tokens and that's it. But the upside of History of Benalia is you don't have to protect it. You don't have to worry about tapping out for it on turn 3 and them using like a lightning bolt or Swords to Plowshares on it. Even if they do bolt one of your tokens, you still get to keep the second token. If they like Abrupt Decay the enchantment, you still get 1 knight. So that lets you pressure your opponents like Narset, or stops them just freely spending all their life with Sylvan Library. You know, it's good in those ways, the same way that Monastery Mentor is. But Monastery Mentor, you often wanted to wait until like turn 4 or later so that you could cast it and then play a spell and immediately get value off it, or cast it with protection. These days in Legacy, protection doesn't really cost mana because people don't really play like Spell Pierce and Flusterstorm. They just play like Force of Negations and things like that. But yeah, you often wanted to wait until turn 4 to play a Mentor because you could like Mentor and then Ponder, something like that. A History of Benalia, no problems, just straight away jam and start putting the pressure on. And the downside of History of Benalia, the fact that it can't go as big as a Monastery Mentor, is achieved. Is that the right word? Like it's mitigated or like negated because the way we plan to combo History of Benalia with this card, Estrid's Invocation. So this is a card from a commander set. Hasn't seen too much play, seen some play in some like Enchantress variants. So what this card does, it's like a 3 mana copy enchantment, like the card from Ravnica block. So yeah, 3 mana enchantment, enters the battlefield as a copy of any enchantment you control. And if you do copy an enchantment when it enters the battlefield, it gains the ability that in your upkeep you can flicker it. So you exile it and return it to the battlefield, and of course when it returns, you can choose to copy an enchantment again. So the way that these two cards combo, the history with the Estrid's Invocation, is that, so turn 3 you play this, turn 4 you play this, copy that. This gets 1 counter straight away because it entered the battlefield as the Saga, so you get 1 knight there. Then in your upkeep, you trigger this, you blink this, copy that, so you get 1 knight. Then you go into your main phase, and then this gains another counter. So every time you blink this, copy this, you get 2 knights. So you know, Bitter Blossom is 1 power, but 1 power per turn. This combo is like 4 power per turn, and then once you get like the third chapter going off of like this dying, then your opponent just gets overrun very, very quickly. A lot of times, like you just play like 2 histories or like history into one of these, and it really puts the opponent under pressure really quickly to deal with it, which doesn't sound like that much. It's only like a turn 6 goldfish or something if you just have this combo, but the rest of your deck is full of all kind of like interactive fear cards, so you can put your opponent under a lot of pressure to deal with that when they're not really expecting it. The other thing is that eventually the original histories will get to level 3 and then you have to sacrifice them. But if you have one Estrid copying a history, then you play another Estrid copy a history as well. Then in your upkeep, you flicker the first one, you copy the second one, then you flicker the second one, and you copy the first one, and they just keep copying each other. So once you have that going, you're getting 4 knights per turn forever. And against like any fear deck, that's game over basically. Yeah, Estrid's Invocation is a very, very, very powerful card. Very easy to like not quite appreciate how strong it is. So this is one of the main combos of the deck. Of course, the deck will want to play other cards to support Estrid's Invocation because you want to have enough targets for things to copy. So we're playing Omen of the Sea, 4 copies. A little bit expensive for Legacy, maybe like 2 mana for a kind of instant speed preordain, but copying it with this is really strong. So it becomes like a Phyrexian Arena. So it's an upgrade from Phyrexian Arena in the sense that it doesn't cost you life every turn in your upkeep to copy it and draw a card. You get to scry 2 every turn before drawing a card, and also you scry 2 and draw a card immediately when this enters the battlefield. Like you don't even have to wait until your next upkeep to get the first draw out of it. So, you know, like the card advantage and the card quality you get from this combo is really, really strong as well. So, yeah, so this is like the main package of the deck. There are a couple other like supporting role players that are a little bit interesting, but a significant portion of the deck is just like pretty straightforward blue-white mid-range or control cards. So we've got 4 Swords to Plowshares, 4 Brainstorm, 4 Ponder. Then 4 Force of Will, 2 Force of Negation. So that's all of the cards that are pretty straightforward. We've also got 2 Counterbalance, which is a nice thing to be able to do on turn 2. When you have the Omen of the Sea going, you have a lot of control over the top of your library, so it can be quite difficult for your opponent to play through this. Sometimes copying it with Estrids can be decent. Like if you have 2 counterbalances, like you flip the first one. If that didn't counter their spell, then you can like brainstorm in response to like counter it with the second trigger. So just having more targets for Estrids can be fine as well. So yeah, counterbalance is pretty decent. It's just kind of like a value spell. It's not, you're not meant to try and be like the countertop style where it like completely locks the opponent out of the game. 1 Teferi just for value. Pretty solid card. You can like tempo the opponent out while you're attacking them with knights. Just answer like any weird permanent. And the next few cards are all pretty unique to the deck. They like synergize with the Saga package as well. So for extra removal spells, we have 3 on Thin Ice, and Detention Sphere. So when I tried this deck last time, I was playing Porphyry Nodes instead of Onthanice, which is like the white version of Drop of Honey. And that card was okay, but I don't like having to wait a turn until the next upkeep before it kills anything. You just often wound up taking too much damage that way. It's a bit slow to deal with things, so having the immediacy of the Onthanice is a big upgrade. It's not perfect to copy it with Estrid's Invocation, because if you do copy Onthanice with Estrid's Invocation, you get to exile one of the creatures, but next turn, if you want to blink the Estrid's Invocation to copy something else, like Omen of the Sea, to draw a card, then whatever you exiled with the Onthanice copy will come back. So it's not really like a Doomblade, it's just like you blinked their guy for one turn. But that can actually be quite solid in the format at the moment. Uro is the most obvious example of why you would want to do that. If you blink your opponent's Uro into the battlefield, but it didn't escape, so it just dies. There are quite a few like Bant decks, for example, that are very reliant on Uro as their win condition. So if your opponent can't break up this like Thanice Estrid combo, or Detention Sphere works the same way, like the Uro can never attack you. So your opponent often has to work like very hard to find a way to win if you put them in that situation. The other creatures that are good to blink for you from the opponent's side are like Sprite Dragon, something like that, because it takes all the counters off it, or Ethereal Forager. If you blink it, then all of the cards that are delved underneath it will just disappear. So yeah, it's not like, so yeah, blinking your opponent's creatures, you can find a way to make that useful. The other thing is that just like having the option to, like, on a turn when you're trying to push for lethal, just like switching your Estrids onto Thanice to remove your opponent's blockers, and then making like a big push for game. That can come up as well. So yeah, that's right. And Detention Sphere is basically the same idea, just except it hits any permanent. So just a flexible answer for like Chalice of the Void or Planeswalkers or anything weird like that. Then we have 2 Medomai's Prophecy. So this card's a bit weird. 2 mana Saga, 1 and a blue. The first chapter Scry 2, the second chapter you name a card, third chapter if you play the card that you named, you get to draw 2 once, and then the last chapter you just peek at the top card of both players' library. So this is like the kind of predict slot that like a normal Miracles deck might play. It's just like a 2 mana card that's meant to generate a little bit of value. When I took this deck out the last time I tried this, I had this slot, and it looked the card kind of underwhelmed me a bit, and I thought I wanted to try something different in this slot instead. So the example I thought of at the time was Dovin's Acuity, this card. So what this does, 3 mana enchantment, when it enters the battlefield you gain 2 life and draw a card, and then if you play an instant in your own main phase, then you can return it from the battlefield to your hand. So this card would be really good if it cost 2 mana, but it's just too hard on the mana curve at 3. Yeah, that's the main problem. The other option, instead of a card like Medomai's Prophecy, is a 2 mana enchantment that just straight up draws a card. So like Spreading Seas or Confounded Conundrum. So like if you were, because basically the issue is that you kind of need a few more targets for your Estrid's Invocation. You're only allowed to play 4 copies of Omen of the Sea. If you could, you'd probably just play 6 like this, but that's not legal. So is this better than something like Spreading Seas. It's a little bit hard to say because when you copy Medomai's Prophecy with Estrids, you don't really want to let it get down to the third mode because then you like waste the blink. I mean, you can do that. It just takes like an extra turn, so it's not the worst. And like into the battlefield, copy Scry. You know, it's like it's okay, but you'd probably rather have the like draw a card every turn of copying the like a Spreading Seas or something like that. And the other thing about Spreading Seas is that it can disrupt like a Cloud Post deck, or you have that like that angle a little bit as well. But part of the reason why I do like the Medomai's Prophecy is the last two cards I'm playing, which are 2 copies of Sevinne's Reclamation. This card is so strong, and this is like one of the best homes for it as well, because you have like one of your main threats. Like one of the problems with a card like Sevinne's Reclamation is that if you play it in like a normal style of deck, in like a non-interactive matchup where they're not like killing or discarding your stuff, then it doesn't do anything. Like all it can get back in that kind of game is maybe like a fetch land. But here, like you have one of the main threats in your deck like actively sacrifices itself, so you usually always have targets for this. And you really want to double up on these as well because it makes the pump effect much stronger the more knights you have. So you have this, so that helps. Then this is one of your main like finishes that you really want to resolve. So Sevinne's Reclamation helps you push that through counters or discard. It's really good with the Teferi and the Detention Sphere. So that's another reason why Medomai's Prophecy is good. It's just another permanent that goes to the graveyard that you can target proactively with Sevinne's Reclamation. So it works better than a card like Spreading Seas or Confounded Conundrum. Omen of the Sea 2 is another card that can go to the graveyard, but spending 3 extra mana to sacrifice it and scry 2 is normally quite expensive. So yeah, Sevinne's Reclamation really, really strong. I was playing Replenish in an older version of this deck instead, but because everything costs less than 3 or less anyway, there's really no point to playing Replenish. Like you're never going to have like a huge Replenish turn where you return like 5 different enchantments or something. Like that's just not realistic. The flashback on this plus the cheaper mana for just returning one thing at a time is so much stronger. So yeah, that's all the spells in the main deck. Oh, the Medomai's Prophecy quite good with Counterbalance as well. So not only the Scry 2, when it enters the battlefield, is good with Counterbalance, obviously, because you can like set up your top card for your opponent's turn. But even on the 4th chapter, where you peek at the top card of both players' library, so you know your top card, so you know what your Counterbalance will flip, and then you know your opponent's top card, so you can like plan for what spell they're going to cast next turn. That's quite synergistic as well. Now the lands are really boring in this list. 1 Tundra, 1 blue fetch land, can be Delta or Tarn or anything like that. 4 Flooded Strand, 4 Prismatic Vista, 5 Snow Island and 5 Snow Plains. Remember they have to be snow because of how On Thin Ice works. So yeah, really straightforward like this. In most blue-white decks in Legacy, you won't see an equal split of islands and plains. Usually there's way more islands. The reason for that is just because History of Benalia, you want the double white on turn 3. So you want a few more plains. What that means is that you can't really play Mystic Sanctuary in the deck, but you don't really want to, because you don't have any like Haymaker spell to return with it. Like you don't have any kind of divination effect, even like a Archmage's Charm or Predict, and of course nothing even bigger than that, like Painful Truths or whatever. You don't really have removal to get with it, except for Plow. Like you don't have like Council's Judgment or anything like that because you're playing Detention Sphere, because it's more synergistic with your enchantment stuff like Estrid's Invocation and Sevinne's Reclamation and all of that. you don't have like Terminus or Supreme Verdict. So all you can really get with it is like Force of Will, which is okay but not amazing, or like Brainstorm or Swords to Plowshares. So Mystic Sanctuary would be really, really mediocre. Like the big sorcery in your deck is Sevinne's Reclamation, and you don't care about returning that with Mystic Sanctuary because it already has flashback anyway. So yeah, Mystic Sanctuary wouldn't work because you have so many planes and you don't really want it in the deck anyway. The one land which you could consider adding, maybe main or side, is a Caracas. That's the only change I might make to the mana base. So onto the sideboard. First new card in the sideboard since I played the deck last time when the newest set was Theros, I think. Yeah, so this card didn't exist. One Kaheera, the Orphanguard. So you might remember that the main deck has no creatures in it, which means you're allowed to play this. It's just like a free Warpath Ghoul that you can summon to your hand and then immediately brainstorm it away if that's what you need to do. Or it can just be a part of your aggro plan. Just play it to the field alongside some knights and then start beating down. Or in a matchup like versus combo, for example, where like you'd rather have more interaction than bunch of History of Benalias, you can like sideboard down on threats, and then you can play like turn 2 Counterbalance, turn 3 put this in your hand while you have like the Force of Will backup, and then just start attacking. You know, that's like a threat that you always have access to. So yeah, pretty valuable sideboard slot. Why not play it, right? That's basically it. So yeah, one Kaheera. Then I'm playing an Enduring, I keep saying Enduring Ideal, Enlightened Tutor package in the sideboard as well. So 2 Enlightened Tutor, then 1 Pithing Needle, 2 Seal of Cleansing, 2 Rest in Peace, 1 Back to Basics, 1 Deafening Silence, 1 Humility, and 1 new card, which is also an enchantment that you can search for. So just talk about these ones first. So 1 Humility, really strong in the deck because you're so token based. Even if the knights are 1/1s with no abilities, they're still knights. So when the third thing of history goes off, they become 3/2s. Even though they don't have vigilance, they're still like outsize all your opponent's creatures. So while you're making a bunch of knights and your opponent's real cards are just 1/1s, it's really easy to pull ahead with Humility. And of course, the reason why Humility might be better than something like Moat is not only obviously because your knights don't have flying, but Moat doesn't stop a lot of creatures that would kill a Moat, right? Like Moat gets taken out by things like Reclamation Sage out of Elves, or Skyclave Apparition out of Death and Taxes, things like that. Whereas Humility just stops all of that. So yeah, Humility is a really strong card in any deck that can support it, and this is a really good place for it, I think. Then Deafening Silence, obviously just really good versus things like Storm. You can also play it versus something like Show and Tell, because if they try and resolve some like big sorcery thing against you, you can just counter it, and then they have no way to respond. So that's pretty good as well. Back to Basics, just versus like Cloud Post decks mostly, but you can bring it in versus anything with a lot of non-basics. 2 Rest in Peace, just as graveyard hate. Bit less effective against Delver now because they don't have Arcanist anymore. So you end up getting like beat down by like Hex Drinkers and stuff instead. So if you don't anticipate playing against a lot of graveyard decks, then you can cut Rest in Peace down to 1. I'm playing 1 Surgical in the sideboard as well, so if you think there's too much graveyard hate, then yeah, you can cut Rest in Peace. 2 Seal of Cleansing. Just a good answer for not only for any decks that have like main deck artifacts and enchantments like Chalice of the Void stuff. I don't know, is anyone playing Enchantress anymore? Like maybe. Yeah, or any like Khan shenanigans, things like that. Seal of Cleansing is pretty decent, but also versus any random like control deck or fear deck, often your opponent will have like Sylvan Libraries or Carpet of Flowers, or like after sideboarding, a lot of weird enchantments tend to be brought in because they're usually quite hard to deal with, so this can be just like a way to preempt all of that kind of stuff. And of course, Seal of Cleansing, it's not a very high impact Enlightened Tutor target, but it's still better than something like Disenchant, because you have all of the like Sevinne's Reclamation and stuff to bring it back. And if you want to kill 2 things, you can sacrifice one of your Estrids to copy it. You know, it's just obviously better in the deck because it's an enchantment. Then 1 Pithing Needle, just for like sneak attack or anything that comes up. You play against like Grindstone or stuff like that. It's just or your name like Dark Depths or Hex Mage. It just has a lot of flexible uses. So these 2 cards is just 2 Dovin's Veto. So this is a pretty generic slot. Depending on what you want to deal with, you could play like Flusterstorm or something instead. Hydroblast even, maybe. I don't think that's probably necessary right now after the Arcanist ban, because you don't have so many targets to hit with it. But yeah, or Celestial Purge is like a reasonable, any like kind of generic blue-white sideboard card. If you want more answers to creatures, you can play like some Supreme Verdict or something in the sideboard as well. Anything like that is totally fine. I'm just using Dovin's Veto as like a generic catch-all at the moment, while the metagame sort of figures itself out. The last new card that I've talked about here is 1 Court of Grace. So what this does, it's a 4 mana enchantment, 2 white. When it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, you make a token. So if you are the monarch, you make a 4/4 flying angel. If you're not the monarch, you make a 1/1 flying spirit. And I put this in the deck just as a replacement for the card I was using in the slot before, which was like a Dawn of Hope, I think. So the main idea with this type of card was just to have something you can bring in versus like slow fear matchups that's like very, very like high impact, like a big finisher type of card. And the other reason was just to have any kind of backup win con in the 75 somewhere, because the way the main deck is built, if they surgical extract your History of Benalia, you basically can't win the game. So post-board games, you often wanted to bring in like some kind of backup win con just to hedge against that possibility. So Court of Grace, just as a sort of card by itself, seemed fine, like quite strong. But it's worth pointing out the interaction between Court of Grace and Estrid's Invocation. So if you have both of these cards in play at the start of your turn, then what you do is you stack the triggers. So you stack the token making trigger, then you stack the blink trigger from this. So the blink trigger resolves first, you blink it, you copy the Court of Grace. Now this enters as a Court of Grace, you become the monarch. Then the token making trigger from the original one resolves, and because you became the monarch from this, you get to make an angel, even if you weren't the monarch at the start of the turn. So that's a really, really powerful interaction. So even if your opponent has some kind of like unblockable creature, or they have like a few creatures that are too many for you to block, you still get to force yourself to become the monarch if you have this combo, and you still force yourself to be able to make angels. And then the next turn, this was already a copy of this, so you get a token trigger from this as well, and this. So you stack both of those, then you stack the blink, you blink this. If they became the monarch, then you take it back again. Then you get to make 2 angels. So it just takes over the game very, very quickly. And that's a very, very powerful combo. So I'm very happy with the Court of Grace. Yeah, that's a very nice upgrade for the deck. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with the list, I think. Like the only thing I would really consider changing at the moment is the few sideboard slots that I mentioned, like the two of the Dovin's Veto, and maybe one of the Rest in Peace is like a flex slot. I think I would definitely play the Kaheera, the 2 Enlightened Tutors, Court. A Needle might be optional as well. I think 2 Seal of Cleansing is strong, the Surgical is good versus all the Uro stuff. At least 1 Rest in Peace, the Deafening Silence, the Back to Basics, and the Humility are all like pretty essential, I think. So these 4 sideboard slots are a little bit more flexible. And the main deck is pretty good as well. So 2 interesting questions you might be wondering, and that I have thought about. The first one is, if Court of Grace is so good, and it is pretty good, especially with this combo, can we cut the History of Benalia from the deck entirely and just rely on this combo as the win con? So that is kind of a possibility. So the interesting thing about maybe doing that is that because you're not trying to build your own board of creatures so much, you can, instead of using something like On Thin Ice, you can play like a real sweeper like Terminus instead. So that would be quite appealing. But once you start making some changes like this, like for example, like Sevinne's Reclamation is really good with this, but you can't really play Sevinne's Reclamation if like this is your main target for it. You really need the History of Benalia as well. So like if you rely on only this, then you kind of have to cut the Sevinne's Reclamation, and then once you do that, like your Estrid's Invocation becomes a little bit vulnerable to like Pyroblast and stuff. Then you're not getting on the board as early with this, so you become a little bit more vulnerable to things like Narset and stuff. This is a little bit of a risk without this, if you're playing against like very aggressive creature decks. Then the other issue is that like once you cut the history, do you have enough targets for this anymore to make this like a reliable top deck? Maybe not. When you only have like the Omen of the Sea, you don't really want to start playing a ton of like Spreading Seas and stuff just to make this more consistent. So once you're at that point, so if you have a list that looks like this, you keep all the Brainstorm, the Plow, because you're still like a blue-white kind of control deck, the Ponders, Teferi, why not? Sure, Detention Sphere, why not? If these are like Terminus, you don't really have enough targets for this anymore. There has to be something else. Keep the Force of Negations. Keep the Force of Wills. Keep the Omens. Probably keep the Counterbalance. Not sure if you keep this. So you have like 2 Court of Grace. And then what are you doing with these? Like they pretty much have to be Estrid targets, but then even then you might not have enough with like the On Thin Ice swap for Terminus and the no history in the deck anymore. So it's an interesting approach to consider using like Court of Grace as the main win con instead of the history, but not only is it like a little bit sketchy trying to justify the Estrid's Invocation in the deck, it also is like is not necessarily strategically an upgrade either, because without having the like proactiveness of the History of Benalia, you give you can give your opponent a lot more time to like set up on you. You can't like randomly catch them with their pants down with just quickly aggroing them out with a bunch of knights, and just by the fact that you're not getting on the board quickly with tokens, your opponent's planeswalker stuff like Narset and Khan becomes a lot more scary as well. So I don't necessarily think that's the correct approach. I think I'd rather stick to the build with the History of Benalia and the On Thin Ice. So that's the first question you might be wondering, like, is the History of Benalia really necessary? The other question that is like semi-obvious, or you know, at least if you've got your brain switched on, is that should this be a Yorion deck? Because you have like Teferi and Omen of the Sea and the Estrid's Invocation, which are all quite good cards to blink. But I think that the answer is no, but it's a little bit debatable. So the first thing is that we already have a companion. So the opportunity cost of including Yorion is a little bit higher than it would be otherwise. The main problem with including Yorion in a deck like this, firstly, is that like the number of things to blink that are like really good to blink is not really too high. It's kind of just like Omen of the Sea plus like Estrid's Invocation. But generally, if your Estrid's Invocation is in play and it's copying something, you're already in like a pretty good position anyway. So like at that point of the game, Yorion seems like a little bit win more. The other reason why Yorion might not be that great is because this deck is like really painful at going up to 80 cards. Like, just to have enough targets for Estrid's Invocation, we're already playing cards like Medomai's Prophecy, which are like sort of on the low end of playability. Like, once we increase the deck up to 80 cards, we have to sort of like look for more things like this just to pad out the space. History of Benalia is like a card where you really want to draw them together in multiples because of how they scale off each other. So if you like bulk the deck out to 80 cards, that's going to happen much less frequently. Like you're going to get the combo of like Estrid's Invocation plus Omen of the Sea less frequently once you have 80 cards. So while there are definitely upsides, like having the free Yorion in some matchups can be strong, like I don't doubt that. Like overall, I just think this probably feels the pressure to be a 60 card deck more than is immediately obvious. Like I think that there's just like a few factors going on like a slightly more subtle level that means that 80 cards is quite hard to make work. But yeah, if you feel like that's the wrong assessment, then yeah, definitely let me know. So yeah, that is the list. So you've seen, this is all the main deck I think here, the spells. Blue-white Sagas, it's definitely a off the beaten path kind of approach. But like I say, I think the best way to think about it is that History of Benalia is just like a kind of Monastery Mentor type card. So you just sort of like view this list in a way like the kind of Jeskai Mentor decks that were semi-popular a while ago, or even like Callum Smith's Esper Mentor. I think the both of the lists are in that same kind of like strategic space. You just have like value stuff going on, but also like you can quickly build a board and turn the corner. So you have a lot of play in like different situations and different matchups. If you have any questions, comments, make sure you post those below. This has been Life at TCG signing out.